The soup kitchen line stretched around the corner of Pike Street, a river of weathered faces and sagging shoulders, all flowing toward the promise of hot food. I stood near the back, hands shoved deep in my jacket pockets, watching steam rise from the serving windows and disappear into Seattle's perpetual drizzle. 20 years old, and I'd learned to make myself small, shoulders hunched, eyes down, just another ghost in a city that had perfected the art of looking through people like me. The jacket I wore had 3 layers beneath it, every piece of clothing I owned worn at once, because there was nowhere safe to leave anything. My tent under the I-5 overpass had been slashed open twice last month, once by kids looking for drugs I didn't have, once by someone who just wanted to hurt something weaker than themselves. I'd stopped trying to figure out which was worse. Caleb Vance? The voice cut through the white noise of traffic and shuffle of feet. I didn't look up at first. Nobody used my full name except cops and social workers, and I'd learned to keep walking when either of them called. But something made me glance toward the curb. A black sedan sat there, too clean for this neighborhood, its paint job reflecting the gray sky like polished obsidian. The man standing beside it wore a suit that probably cost more than I'd seen in my entire life, but his face was kind in a way that immediately made me suspicious. Kind faces always wanted something. "Caleb Vance," he repeated, and now I saw he was holding a manila folder, my name visible on the tab even from 15 feet away. I thought about running. My muscles tensed, calculating the distance to the alley behind the church, the route through the construction site that would lose anyone over 30, but hunger kept my feet planted. I hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the smell of whatever they were serving inside, something with beans and cornbread, was making my stomach cramp with need. "Who's asking?" My voice came out rougher than I intended, months of not using it for anything but essential communication. The man walked toward me slowly, hands visible, like you'd approach a stray dog. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm a probate attorney from Billings, Montana. I've been looking for you for 6 weeks, Mr. Vance. Your grandfather has passed away." The words didn't connect to anything real in my mind. Grandfather. The concept was as foreign as speaking Mandarin. I'd grown up in foster care since I was 6, bounced between 11 homes before aging out of the system at 18. My mother, whoever she was now, whatever basement or street corner she was using on, had always said we had no family. Just her and me against the world, and then just me when she chose heroin over keeping me. "Wrong guy," I said, turning back toward the soup kitchen line that had moved forward 3 people while I wasn't paying attention. "Caleb Nathaniel Vance, born March 14th, 20 years ago at Harborview Medical Center," Arthur said behind me, reading from papers I could hear rustling. "Mother, Rebecca Vance. Father, unknown. Entered state custody at age 6 following neglect charges. Multiple foster placements, juvenile detention at 13 for shoplifting, released at 18 months later with nowhere to go." My jaw clenched. He had my file. He'd read the highlights reel of my spectacular failure to be worth keeping. I spun around, anger flaring hot in my chest. "Yeah, you got my resume. Congratulations. What do you want? I got nothing to steal, and I'm not signing anything." Arthur's expression didn't change. Still that patient, tired kindness that made me want to punch something. "I don't want anything from you, Caleb. I'm here to give you something. Your grandfather, Silas Vance, passed away 6 weeks ago at age 73. He left explicit instructions in his will that his entire estate should pass to you, his only grandchild." The drizzle had turned into proper rain, cold drops sliding down my neck, but I couldn't move. Estate. The word suggested money, property, things that belonged in a world I'd only ever looked at through windows. "How much money we talking about?" The question came out before I could stop it, naked greed that I'd learned to hide better than this. Arthur glanced at the folder, then back at me. The estate is primarily a working cattle ranch called Whispering Pines, located about 40 miles northeast of Billings. 3,000 acres, approximately 500 head of cattle, the main house, several outbuildings, and equipment. The property was appraised at $3.2 million. $3 million. The number was so large it didn't mean anything. I'd stolen a sandwich once that cost $6 and spent 3 months in juvie for it. I'd worked under-the-table construction for $7 an hour until the foreman figured out I was homeless and decided my wages weren't worth paying. $3 million existed in the same reality as unicorns and honest politicians. "This is bullshit," I said flatly. "Some kind of scam. You want me to sign something, pay some processing fee, and then disappear with whatever I got left?" Arthur did something unexpected. He laughed, though it sounded sad. "I can understand the skepticism. In your position, I would think the same thing." He closed the folder and held it against his chest, rain darkening the shoulders of his expensive suit. "How about this? I'll buy you lunch, somewhere warm, somewhere with a real menu. You can eat while I explain everything, and if you still think I'm running a scam, you walk away. No obligation, no fees, nothing to sign. Just a hot meal and information about your grandfather." I looked at the soup kitchen line, now 15 people ahead of where I'd been standing. Looked at Arthur Sterling with his genuine suit and genuine offer and genuine face that my instinct screamed was too good to be true. But beneath the anger and suspicion, something else stirred. Something I'd learned to bury because it hurt too much when it got crushed. Curiosity. The question I'd carried my whole life, wrapped in barbed wire and shoved down deep. Why didn't anyone want me? "Fine," I heard myself say, "but somewhere close. And I'm sitting where I can see the door." The diner Arthur chose was 6 blocks from the soup kitchen, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and had vinyl booths repaired with duct tape. I slid into the booth farthest from the entrance, back against the wall, eyes on both the front door and the emergency exit near the kitchen. Arthur sat across from me without comment, ordered coffee for both of us, and told the waitress I could have anything on the menu. I ordered 3 eggs, hash browns, bacon, toast, and a side of pancakes. Arthur's eyebrows went up slightly, but he said nothing, just added a bowl of oatmeal for himself. When the food came, steaming more than I could possibly eat, but I'd try anyway, I forced myself to go slow. Eating too fast after days of nothing would make me sick, and I wasn't giving this man the satisfaction of watching me puke in his nice diner. Between bites, Arthur opened the folder and spread documents across the table like he was dealing cards. Birth certificate. My birth certificate, yellowed and official, with my mother's name and father unknown, in the space where another name should be. Then photographs. Old Polaroids of people I didn't recognize. A man with my bone structure and my dark hair, standing in front of a wooden fence with mountains behind him. The same man, older, holding a baby in one arm and a rope in the other, a horse visible in the background. "That's Silas," Arthur said, tapping the older photograph. "And that's you, about 3 months old. Your mother brought you to Montana that summer. It was the only time Silas got to meet you in person." I stared at the photo, trying to remember something, anything, but my earliest memories started at 5, maybe 6. Vague impressions of my mother's apartment, the smell of cigarettes and mildew, cartoon shows I'd watch while she slept off whatever she'd taken the night before. Nothing before that. Certainly no mountains or horses or grandfather who looked at baby me like I mattered. "My mother said we had no family," I said, my voice flat. "She said it was just us." Arthur's expression grew heavier, sad in a way that made lines deepen around his eyes. "Your mother left Montana when you were about 6 months old. From what I understand, she and Silas had a significant falling out. He wanted her to get help for her addiction, wanted to take custody of you until she was stable. She refused, took you and disappeared into the system. Different cities, different names. He looked for both of you for years." The pancakes suddenly tasted like paste. I swallowed with effort, washed it down with coffee that was too hot and scalded my throat. If he was looking so hard, why'd it take 20 years to find me? Because your mother was very good at staying hidden, Arthur said quietly, and because the foster care system is designed to protect children's privacy, even from family members who might have good intentions. Every time Silas hired a private investigator, every time he filed paperwork with the state, he hit walls. When you entered state custody at 6, he applied for kinship placement. Do you know what that is? I shook my head, still chewing mechanically. It's when family members request to foster a child instead of the child going to strangers. Silas applied, submitted to background checks, filled out hundreds of pages of documentation. But he was 67 years old, living alone on a remote ranch with no experience raising young children. The state deemed him too old, too isolated. They denied his petition. Something hot and sharp twisted in my chest. I'd spent years in homes where I wasn't wanted, where I was a paycheck or a good deed or a problem to be managed. And somewhere in Montana, there'd been a man, my grandfather, trying to get me out, trying to bring me home to a place I'd never known existed. He could have tried again, I said, but the words came out weak. When I was older, when I was in juvie, or when I aged out. Arthur pulled out another stack of papers, this time photocopies of letters, all of them on official state letterhead, all of them saying essentially the same thing. We cannot provide information about the minor in question. We cannot facilitate contact. We cannot forward correspondence. For the child's safety and privacy, further inquiries will not be answered. He tried, Arthur said simply. For 14 years he tried. He hired 4 different investigators. He wrote letters to every social services office in Washington state. He attended family court hearings he wasn't technically allowed to be at, just to try to get information. When you were released from detention at 18, he thought he'd finally be able to reach you directly. No more state interference because you were legally an adult, but by then you'd disappeared into the streets. I pushed my plate away, stomach churning despite the food I'd put in it. So what, he gave up? No. Arthur's voice was firm now. He got sick. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed about a year ago. By the time they caught it, it was stage 4. He had maybe 6 months. But he used that time to update his will, to make absolutely certain that when I finally found you, and he believed I would, everything would be ready. He wanted you to have the ranch, Caleb. He wanted you to have a home. The word landed like a physical blow. Home. 4 letters that meant nothing and everything, a concept so foreign I didn't even know how to hold it in my head properly. I'd spent my entire life in places that were temporary, conditional, always one mistake away from eviction. Group homes and foster houses and juvenile detention and a tent under an overpass. None of them home. Just places I existed until someone decided I couldn't exist there anymore. Why would he leave it to me? I asked, and hated how my voice cracked on the last word. He didn't know me. I don't know anything about ranching or Montana or... I'm nobody. I'm just some street kid with a record. Arthur reached across the table and did something nobody had done in so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like. He put his hand over mine. His palm was warm and dry, and I could feel calluses that suggested he was more than just a lawyer in an expensive suit. "You're Silas Vance's grandson," he said firmly. "That made you somebody to him. You were somebody from the moment you were born, and the fact that circumstances kept you apart doesn't change that. He spent 14 years trying to find you, and when he couldn't, he spent his last year making sure that when you were found, you'd never have to sleep in the cold again." I pulled my hand back, suddenly too full of feelings I didn't have names for. The diner felt too small, the walls closing in, and I needed to move, to run, to do something with the electricity that was sparking through my nervous system like live wires. "I need to think," I managed. I need time." "Of course," Arthur pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "That's my office number and my cell. Call me when you're ready. But Caleb—" He waited until I met his eyes. "The ranch needs someone. The cattle need feeding, the fences need mending, and the property taxes are due in 3 months. If you don't claim the estate, it'll go to auction, and everything your grandfather built will be gone. I'm not trying to pressure you, but time is a factor." I took the card because I didn't know what else to do, shoved it in my pocket next to a lighter that didn't work and a bus transfer from 2 weeks ago. What if I just sell it? Take the money and— "That's your right," Arthur said. "It's your property. You can do whatever you want with it. But I'd ask that you at least see it first. Let me drive you to Montana, show you what you're inheriting. If you still want to sell after that, I'll help you find a buyer." I looked out the diner window at the rain-slicked street, at the people hurrying past, with places to be and homes to return to. I thought about my tent, if it was still standing, or if someone had kicked it over again. I thought about $3 million and a grandfather who'd spent 14 years searching for a grandson he'd only met once. "When can we leave?" I asked. "If you've made it this far in my story, I need to tell you something." I almost said no. I almost walked out of that diner, threw Arthur's card in the first trash can I passed, and went back to the only life I knew. Because accepting that there'd been someone looking for me, someone who wanted me, meant accepting that I'd spent 14 years alone when I didn't have to be. And that kind of pain, the kind that comes from knowing things could have been different, is harder to carry than the pain of believing you were never wanted at all. But I didn't walk away. And what happened next changed everything. The drive from Seattle to Montana took 2 days because Arthur insisted on stopping at a motel the first night. "You need real sleep," he said when I argued that we could drive straight through. "And a shower. Trust me, the ranch will still be there in the morning." The motel room had a bed that didn't smell like mildew, water pressure that actually worked, and little bottles of shampoo that I used 3 of because I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this clean. I stood under the hot water until it ran cold, watching dirt swirl down the drain, actual visible dirt, not just the metaphorical kind. When I finally crawled into bed, wrapped in sheets that were clean and scratchy, I passed out so hard I didn't dream. The landscape changed as we drove east. Seattle's claustrophobic grey gave way to the Cascades, mountains that rose up sharp and white with snow, even in late spring. Then the mountains fell away into high plains that stretched forever, nothing but sagebrush and sky in all directions. The space was terrifying. In the city, you could hide in crowds, blend into the background noise. Out here, there was nowhere to hide. You were just exposed, visible, a speck under a sky so big it made me understand why people believed in God. "You get used to it," Arthur said, noticing my discomfort. "The openness. Silas used to say it was like living under the biggest ceiling in the world. Room to breathe, room to think. Room to go crazy," I muttered, watching an antelope bound across the highway shoulder, moving with a grace I'd never seen in the rats and pigeons of Seattle. Arthur smiled. "That too, sometimes. But isolation isn't the same as loneliness. Silas had friends, had the ranch hands during busy seasons, had a community in town. He wasn't a hermit, just a man who liked quiet. We stopped for lunch at a truck stop somewhere in eastern Washington, all linoleum and fluorescent lights and waitresses who called everyone Hun. I ordered a burger and Arthur ordered the same, and while we ate, he told me stories about Silas. How he'd built the ranch from nothing, buying land piece by piece over 30 years. How he'd survived 3 bad winters that killed off neighboring ranches. How he'd been known as a fair man, tough but honest. The kind of person people came to when they needed help and knew they'd get it without judgment. "He sounds like a saint," I said, not bothering to hide my skepticism. In my experience, people who got described as good were usually just better at hiding their bad. Arthur shook his head. Not a saint. Just a man trying his best. He had flaws, stubborn as hell, didn't trust easily, held grudges longer than he should have. But he loved deeply the few people he let in. Your mother was one of them. Losing her the way he did, losing you, I think it broke something in him that never quite healed. I didn't know what to do with that information, so I focused on my burger and let Arthur's words settle somewhere in my chest where I could examine them later, when they wouldn't hurt so much. We crossed into Montana around sunset of the second day. The light hit the landscape differently here, gold and copper and shades of red I didn't have names for, turning the grass into something that looked like fire. Arthur turned off the highway onto a smaller road, then onto a gravel drive, marked by a wooden sign so weathered I could barely make out the words burned into it. Whispering Pines Ranch. The drive went on for what felt like miles, winding between fence posts and across a cattle guard that made the car rattle. Then the house appeared, and I stopped breathing. It wasn't what I'd expected. I'd pictured something fancy, maybe. A mansion, something that justified $3 million. But this was working architecture. A massive two-story timber structure with a wide porch wrapping around three sides, windows that reflected the sunset, and a stone chimney rising from one end like a finger pointing at the sky. The logs were dark with age and weather, chinked with white cement that had cracked in places, and the whole thing looked like it had grown out of the earth rather than been built on it. Behind the house stood a barn, painted red decades ago. The color now faded to the shade of dried blood. Equipment I couldn't identify sat in organized rows near a machine shed. Cattle dotted the distant fields, dark shapes against grass that moved like water in the evening wind. 3,000 acres, Arthur said quietly, putting the car in park. Most of it is grazing land, but there's timber up in the hills, and a creek that runs year-round. Silas protected a section as wetland habitat. You can't develop it, but it's worth it for the birds and the wildlife. I got out of the car slowly, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled completely different from Seattle. Sage and grass and something warm I eventually identified as cattle. It was quiet in a way that made my ears ring, no traffic or sirens or bass from someone's car stereo. Just wind and the occasional low of a cow and silence that felt alive. The front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was maybe mid-50s, built like someone who'd spent their life doing physical labor, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and a face that could have been carved from the same timber as the house. She wore jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between hope and suspicion. "Martha Higgins," Arthur said, gesturing to her. "She's been managing the ranch since Silas got sick, kept it running even after he passed." I climbed the porch steps, feeling Martha's assessment of me like a physical weight. I probably looked like exactly what I was, a street kid, out of place and overwhelmed, wearing clothes that had been slept in and boots held together with duct tape. "Caleb," she said, and it wasn't a question. She studied my face, and something in her expression shifted. "You got his eyes. Same shape, same color." Silas would have seen it right away. "Nice to meet you," I managed, the words feeling inadequate and formal, borrowed from some script I'd heard other people use. She nodded once, crisp. "Arthur probably told you I've been keeping things going. I'm paid through the end of the month. After that," she shrugged, "depends on what you decide to do with the place. If you're selling, I'll need time to find another position. If you're keeping it, we need to talk about what you plan to do, because running a ranch isn't something you figure out on the fly." The bluntness should have irritated me, but instead I felt a weird respect for it. She wasn't coddling me or pretending this was anything other than what it was, a practical situation that required practical decisions. "I haven't decided anything yet," I said honestly. "I barely believe this is real." Something that might have been sympathy flickered across her face. Come on, I'll show you the house. You can sleep in Silas's room if you want. I changed the sheets this morning, or there's a guest room. Either way, you should probably get settled before dark. The inside of the house smelled like old wood and leather and dust, but underneath that was something else. Pipe tobacco and coffee, and the faint scent of wood smoke from fires burned in the stone fireplace that dominated the living room. The furniture was worn but solid, leather couches that had been sat in for decades, a coffee table made from what looked like a single plank of wood, bookcases stuffed with titles about cattle breeding and veterinary medicine and Montana history. The walls were covered in photographs, and I stopped to look at them despite Martha's continued tour. Here was Silas, younger, maybe in his 40s, standing next to a prize bull. Here he was older, grey-haired, sitting on a horse and grinning at the camera. Here were photos of other people, ranch hands maybe, or neighbours, all arranged in a timeline that tracked decades of life. And there, in a frame by itself on a small table, was the photo Arthur had shown me, baby me in Silas's arms. But this version was larger, and I could see details I'd missed in the photocopied image. The way Silas was looking at me, not at the camera. The careful way his large, weathered hand supported my head. The absolute focus, like in that moment, nothing else in the world existed except making sure I was safe. "He kept that one out special," Martha said, coming back to stand beside me. "After your mother left, he put away all the other photos of her, said it hurt too much to see them. But he kept this one. Said it reminded him what he was working for." My throat felt tight. "Working for?" She gestured around the house, out toward the land beyond the windows. "All of this. He was always a hard worker, but after he lost you and your mother, he became almost obsessed, building the herd, improving the land, making the ranch profitable. I always thought he was just distracting himself from grief, but near the end, when he was sick, he told me the truth. He said he was building something to leave you, something that would prove you'd always been wanted, always been thought of, even if you never knew it." I turned away from the photograph because looking at it was making my chest ache in ways I didn't know how to handle. "Can I see my room? The guest room, I mean." Martha led me upstairs, down a hallway with more photographs and framed landscapes, to a room at the end. It was simple. A double bed with a quilt in shades of blue and green, a dresser, a window that looked out over the fields toward the mountains. No posters or personal items, just clean lines and functional furniture. "Bathrooms across the hall," Martha said. "Arthur's staying at the motel in town, but I live in the foreman's cabin down by the creek. You need anything, there's a walkie-talkie on the dresser. Just press the button and call for me." After she left, I stood at the window and watched the last of the sunset fade into darkness. Stars appeared, more than I had ever seen in my life, so many they looked like someone had spilled sugar across black paper. The quiet pressed in from all sides, and for the first time in 2 days, I was alone with the reality of what had happened. I'd inherited a ranch, $3 million. A house full of evidence that someone had loved me, had wanted me, had spent their last years making sure I'd have something after they were gone. And I didn't know the first thing about any of it. I slept poorly that night, too aware of the space and the silence and the weight of decisions I had no framework for making. When I finally gave up and went downstairs around 5 in the morning, I found coffee already made in the kitchen and a note from Martha. "Working the north pasture. Help yourself to breakfast. We need to talk when I get back." I drank the coffee, standing at the window, watching the sky lighten from black to grey to pink. The cattle were moving, dark shapes in the pre-dawn light, and I could see Martha in the distance on a horse, working with an ease that suggested decades of practice. This was her world. She understood it in ways I never would. The rational thing to do would be to sell, Take the money, go somewhere warm, rent an apartment with actual heat and running water, figure out what normal life looked like for someone who'd never had it. $3 million could buy a lot of normal. But something kept me standing at that window long after the coffee went cold in my hand. Something in the photographs on the walls, in the way Silas had looked at baby me, like I was the center of his universe, in the quiet that felt less like emptiness and more like space to breathe. I needed to find that workshop Arthur had mentioned, the place where Silas kept his papers. If I was going to make a decision, I needed to understand what I was deciding about. The workshop wasn't hard to find. Past the barn, set back against a line of pine trees, was a building I'd mistaken for another storage shed. But when I tried the door, it was locked. Not with a normal padlock, but with a heavy deadbolt that required a key. I went back to the house and searched Silas's study, a room off the living room that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. His desk was massive, dark wood with drawers that stuck slightly when I pulled them open. Most contained ranch paperwork, receipts, breeding records, tax documents organized in hanging folders with handwritten labels. But in the bottom drawer, under a stack of agricultural magazines, I found a small metal box. Inside was a single iron key on a simple ring, heavy and old-fashioned, with a piece of masking tape wrapped around it. Someone had written on the tape in black marker, "The Workshop." My hands were shaking as I walked back outside, the key burning a hole in my pocket. This felt significant in a way I couldn't explain, like opening this door would change something fundamental. But I couldn't turn back now. The workshop lock turned smoothly, well-oiled, despite apparent disuse. Inside, it smelled like sawdust and varnish and machine oil, smells I associated with construction sites where I'd worked under the table doing grunt work for cash. The space was organized with the same precision as the rest of the ranch. Tools hanging on pegboards, their outlines traced so you could see where each belonged. A workbench with a vise, a table saw in the corner, covered with a tarp. But it was the wall that made me stop breathing. Maps, dozens of them, pinned up in overlapping layers that covered 8 feet of space from floor to ceiling. Maps of Washington State with cities circled in red marker. Maps of Seattle with neighborhoods highlighted, printouts of addresses, some crossed out, others starred, and photographs, school photos that must have been obtained from official sources, showing me at different ages. 8 years old with missing front teeth, 10 years old, thin and serious. 13 years old, the mugshot from my juvenile arrest. Beneath the maps was a timeline, written directly on the wall in Silas's handwriting, dates and notes tracking his search. 2011, Rebecca leaves with Caleb. Last known address, Seattle. 2012, private investigator hired, multiple addresses investigated, all dead ends. 2013, Rebecca arrested for possession. Caleb enters state custody. Applied for kinship placement, denied. 2014, attempted contact through social services, all requests blocked. The timeline continued year after year, a chronicle of failed attempts and closed doors, private investigators fired and hired, letters sent and returned, court appearances where Silas had tried to get information, only to be told that the case was sealed, that he had no legal standing, that the minor's privacy was paramount. 2019, Caleb turns 18, released from system, attempts to locate, unsuccessful. Last known address, unknown. Last known employment, none. Status, homeless. The question mark at the end broke something in me. He'd known. At the end, Silas had known I was on the streets, and he'd kept searching anyway. I moved to the workbench, where a cardboard box sat, lid labeled in the same careful handwriting, for Caleb, if found. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, organized by year, each in an envelope addressed to social services offices, foster homes, juvenile detention centers. Every single one stamped, return to sender or addressee unknown, or access denied by court order. I pulled one out at random, dated 2014, addressed to the Department of Social Services in King County. To whom it may concern, this is my 43rd letter, requesting information about my grandson, Caleb Nathaniel Vance, currently in state custody. I understand that his privacy must be protected, but I am not seeking to disrupt his placement. I only wish to know that he is safe, that he is being cared for, and that he knows he has family who loves him. I am 70 years old. I own a working cattle ranch with stable income and a safe home. I have no criminal record, and I have passed every background check your department has required. I am asking, begging, to be considered for kinship placement. If that is not possible, please at least tell him about me. Tell him he has a grandfather who thinks of him every day. Tell him he is wanted. Please, I am running out of time to make this right. Silas Vance. The paper crumpled in my grip. I dropped it and grabbed another, dated 2016. Dear Caleb, I don't know if you'll ever read this. The state won't tell me where you are, won't forward my letters, won't let me be part of your life. But I keep writing them anyway because I need you to know that somewhere in Montana there's an old man who thinks about you every single day. I'm sorry I couldn't get to you sooner. I'm sorry your mother took you away before I could help her, help both of you. I'm sorry the system built walls between us that I can't break down. But I'm not giving up. I'm building something for you, Caleb. A home, a future, a place where you'll always belong. Even if I never get to meet you again, even if you never know my name, I'm making sure you'll have something when you need it most. You are loved. Remember that. You have always been loved. Your grandfather, Silas. I sat on the floor of the workshop, surrounded by evidence of 14 years of desperate searching, and I cried. Not quiet tears or dignified grief, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that felt like they were tearing something out of my chest. All those years in foster homes where I wasn't wanted, where I was just a burden or a paycheck. All those nights in detention or on the streets, believing I was alone because no one had ever cared enough to find me. And the whole time, there'd been a man in Montana writing letters I'd never receive, hiring investigators to track dead ends, fighting a system designed to keep us apart. Not because he'd failed me, but because he'd been prevented from reaching me. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the sun to rise higher, for the light coming through the workshop window to shift from golden to white. Long enough for Martha to come looking for me. She didn't knock, just opened the door and stopped when she saw me on the floor, surrounded by letters. She looked at the wall of maps, at the timeline, and her expression softened into something that looked like understanding. "You found it," she said quietly. I wiped my face with my sleeve, tried to pull myself together. "Why didn't someone tell me? Arthur, someone should have explained. How could we tell you something you had to feel for yourself?" Martha said, settling onto an overturned crate near the door. Her voice was gentle, stripped of its earlier bluntness. Arthur could have explained every detail, could have shown you bank statements and property deeds. I could have told you stories about how Silas talked about you every damn day, how he kept that photo out where he'd see it first thing every morning. But would you have believed it? Or would you have thought we were trying to manipulate you into keeping the ranch? I looked down at the letter still clutched in my hand, at Silas's careful handwriting blurring through my tears. I would have thought it was a scam. Exactly. She stood, moved to the wall of maps, traced one of the red circles with her finger. Silas knew that too. He told me once, near the end, that if you were ever found, you'd need to discover the truth on your own terms. That's why he left everything in here locked up. He wanted you to have the choice to look or not look, to believe or walk away. I pushed myself to standing, legs shaky, and moved to the workbench where more boxes sat unopened. "What else is in here?" Martha gestured to a wooden chest in the corner, plain and practical, secured with a combination lock. That one's got his personal things, photos, journals, letters from your mother before things went bad. The combination is written on a piece of paper in the desk drawer back at the house. He left instructions with Arthur to tell you where to find it, but only if you asked. He didn't want to force anything on you. The chest felt heavy with significance, but I wasn't ready to open it yet. The letters had already cracked something open in me, and I needed time to process before I could handle more. Instead, I turned to Martha, trying to focus on something practical, something that didn't require emotional excavation. "You said we needed to talk. About the ranch?" She nodded, seemingly relieved to shift to solid ground. "Yeah, look, I'll be straight with you. This place doesn't run itself, and I can't do it alone much longer. I've been working 14-hour days since Silas got too sick to help, and I'm 56 years old. My knees are shot and my back's not far behind. I can manage through spring calving if you decide to keep the operation going, but after that, you'll need to either hire additional help or sell the herd and lease the grazing rights to someone else." Spring calving? The terminology was foreign, words from a language I'd never learned. "The cows drop their calves between February and April," Martha explained, patient but matter-of-fact. "We've got about 200 bred heifers and cows that'll need monitoring, assistance if there's trouble, tagging and vaccinating the calves once they're born. It's the most labor-intensive part of the year, but it's also where you make or lose money in the cattle business." I thought about my complete lack of qualifications, my absence of knowledge about anything she was describing. I don't know how to do any of that. I don't know anything about ranching or cattle or... I gestured helplessly at the window, toward the vast expanse of land that was supposedly mine. "Nobody's born knowing it," Martha said. "Silas wasn't. He grew up in Billings, worked construction until he was 35, then bought 50 acres and 10 head of cattle with money he'd saved. He learned by doing, by making mistakes, by asking questions. Took him 20 years to build this place into what it is now." 20 years, I repeated, the number feeling impossible. I'd never planned 20 days ahead, let alone 20 years. Martha crossed her arms, studying me with that same assessing look she'd given me when I first arrived. "Here's what I think, and you can tell me to mind my own business if you want. You've got 3 choices right now. 1, sell everything, take the money, disappear. That's your right, and nobody would blame you. 2, keep the property but lease it out, hire a management company to run things while you collect income and live somewhere else. 3, stay and learn. Work the ranch, make mistakes, figure it out one day at a time." She paused, and her expression softened just slightly. "Silas spent 14 years making sure you'd have the first 2 options. But what he really wanted, what he dreamed about during those last months was option 3. He wanted you to have what he had. A place to belong. Work that mattered. Land that would hold you when nothing else would." The workshop suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in with the weight of expectations and possibilities and a dead man's dreams. I walked to the window, looked out at fields I didn't understand, toward mountains that were beautiful and terrifying in their indifference. What if I'm not capable of it? The question came out quieter than I intended, exposing a fear I usually kept buried. What if I try and I fail and I lose everything anyway? "Then you fail," Martha said bluntly. "Then you lose it and you move on, and at least you'll know you tried. But Caleb," she waited until I turned to look at her, "you've survived things that would have broken most people. You spent years on the streets in a city that eats people alive, and you're still standing. You think learning to feed cattle is harder than that?" I didn't have an answer. The survival skills I'd developed, how to stay invisible, where to find food, which shelters to avoid, how to tell when someone was dangerous, none of them translated to this world. But maybe that was the point. Maybe starting from zero meant I could build something different, something stable. "If I stay," I said slowly, testing the words, "if I try this, I'm going to need help. A lot of help. I'll need you to teach me everything, and I'll probably make mistakes that cost money or hurt animals or—" "Yep," Martha interrupted. "You will absolutely screw things up. You'll leave gates open and cattle will get into the wrong pasture. You'll probably get kicked at least once. You'll spend nights pulling calves in freezing weather, wondering what the hell you were thinking. And then one morning you'll wake up and realize you know what needs doing before anyone tells you. You'll see a storm coming and move the herd without being asked. You'll deliver a calf by yourself and feel like you just performed a miracle." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Take some time, think about it. Arthur's coming back tomorrow to go over the legal paperwork. Taxes, bank accounts, all that boring stuff. You should probably decide by then what you want to do, because every day we wait is a day the operation loses money or momentum. But whatever you choose, I'll help you with the transition. That's what Silas would have wanted." After Martha left, I stood in the workshop for a long time, surrounded by evidence of Silas's relentless search, his unwavering belief that someday I'd be found. I thought about the letter that talked about building something for me, about creating a home I didn't know I needed. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not to God exactly, I'd never been sure what I believed about that, but to Silas, to the grandfather I'd never known but who'd known me, who'd loved me in absentia for 2 decades. "I don't know if I can do this," I said out loud, my voice strange in the quiet workshop. "I don't know if I'm strong enough or smart enough or capable of being what you thought I could be. But I'm here. I found your letters. I know you tried. And maybe that's enough to start with." The afternoon light slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. Outside, I could hear cattle calling to each other, a sound that was becoming familiar. In the distance, Martha's horse whinnied, and the wind moved through the pines with the sound that had given the ranch its name, a whisper, like voices carrying across time and distance, saying I was wanted. I was loved. I had always belonged somewhere. I locked the workshop behind me and walked back to the house, the key heavy in my pocket. Inside, I found the combination written on a slip of paper in Silas's desk, just where Martha said it would be. But I didn't go back to open the chest. Not yet. Some revelations needed time, needed readiness. I'd spent the last several hours learning that my entire understanding of my past had been wrong. That was enough truth for one day. Instead, I went to the kitchen and found Martha's walkie-talkie instructions, pressed the button, heard static, then her voice. "Yeah? It's Caleb," I said, still awkward with the technology, with asking for help. "Can you teach me about the ranch, the cattle, everything? I want to try. Option 3, I want to stay." The silence stretched long enough that I thought maybe the connection had failed. Then Martha's voice came back, and I could hear something that might have been emotion underneath the practical tone. "Be ready at 5 tomorrow morning. Dress warm. We'll start with feeding and work our way up from there. And Caleb, welcome home." I set the walkie-talkie down, those last 2 words echoing in the empty kitchen. Welcome home. I'd heard people say it before. Foster parents trying to make me feel comfortable in temporary spaces, shelter workers trying to add warmth to institutional beds. But this was the first time the words felt true. Not because the place was familiar or comfortable, but because it had been waiting for me. Built for me, held in trust by a man who'd never stopped believing I'd eventually arrive. That night, I slept in Silas's room instead of the guest room. The sheets smelled like lavender detergent, and beneath that faintly, like pipe tobacco. His books lined shelves on 2 walls, ranching manuals, veterinary guides, novels with cracked spines that showed they'd been read multiple times. On the nightstand sat a photograph I hadn't noticed before. Silas as a young man, maybe my age, sitting on a fence rail with mountains behind him, grinning at the camera with an expression that was equal parts determination and hope. I picked up the frame, studied his face for similarities to my own. Martha had been right about the eyes, same shape, same color, but there was something else too, something in the set of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders. A stubbornness, maybe, a refusal to quit even when quitting would have been easier. "I'll try," I told the photograph, told the man who'd spent his last years building something for a grandson he'd never stopped searching for. "I don't know if I'll be any good at this, but I'll try. That's got to count for something." Outside, the wind moved through the pines, whispering, and for the first time in my 20 years of life, I fell asleep in a bed that didn't belong to someone else, in a house that was mine, on land that had been waiting for me to come home. 5 in the morning arrived like a physical assault. The alarm on my phone, the one luxury I'd kept charged using library outlets and coffee shop goodwill, shrieked in the darkness, and I jolted awake disoriented, expecting the usual sounds of Seattle, traffic, sirens, someone screaming about something 3/10 over. Instead, there was silence so complete, it felt like being underwater. I dressed in layers, everything I owned, plus a heavy coat I'd found in Silas's closet that smelled like him, tobacco and hay, and something sharp like leather oil. Outside, the cold hit like a slap, air so frigid it burned going into my lungs. The thermometer by the back door read 18 degrees, and frost covered everything in a glittering shell that crunched under my boots. Martha was already in the barn, moving with the efficient economy of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. She looked up when I stumbled in, assessed my layers with a nod of approval. "You'll warm up once we start moving. Coffee's in the thermos by the door. Drink it fast because we need to get feed out before full light." The coffee was black and strong enough to strip paint. Exactly what I needed. I drank it standing up, watching Martha hook a trailer to a battered pickup truck that looked like it had survived several wars. "Cattle eat twice a day this time of year," she explained, gesturing for me to climb into the passenger seat. "Morning and evening. In summer, when there's grass, they mostly feed themselves. But November through April, we're their grocery store. Miss a feeding or show up late, and you'll hear about it." We drove out into fields that were still dark, headlights cutting through pre-dawn gloom. But I could hear them before I could see them, a low chorus of moos and bellows that grew louder as we approached. Then the headlights caught them. Hundreds of cattle, dark shapes pressing toward the fence line, breath steaming in the cold air like a dragon convention. "They look hungry," I said, which felt like the most obvious statement ever made. "They're always hungry," Martha said, backing the trailer up to a gate. "Cows are professional eaters. That's literally their job. Eat grass, turn it into beef, make babies who'll do the same. Everything else is just details." She showed me how to cut the twine on hay bales. Always away from your body, always with a sharp knife because a dull one would slip and cut you worse. How to break the bales apart and spread them in lines so the cattle could all eat without fighting. How to count heads while you worked, making sure everyone was present and moving normally. "You see one standing alone, not eating, that's a problem," she said, pointing to a cow in the distance. "Could be sick, could be in labor, could be nothing. But you always check. Ranching is 90% routine and 10% noticing when something's off." I tried to help, fumbling with frozen twine and hay that seemed determined to stick to everything except where I wanted it to go. The cattle pressed close, their warm bodies and pungent smell overwhelming, and I stumbled backward when one got too close, massive heads swinging toward me with what felt like malicious intent. "She's not going to hurt you," Martha said, not even trying to hide her amusement. "She just wants her breakfast. Stand your ground. They respect confidence, even if it's fake." And by the time we finished feeding the first group and moved to the second pasture, then the third, the sun was rising, turning the frost into liquid gold. My hands were numb despite gloves. My back ached from lifting bales that weighed more than I did, and I was sweating under all my layers despite the cold, but there was something oddly satisfying about the work, the straightforward cause and effect of it. Cattle hungry, you feed them. Hay bale heavy, you lift it anyway. Simple in a way nothing in my life had ever been simple. How many head total? I asked as we drove back toward the barn, my voice rough from cold air and not talking. 517 as of last count, Martha said. That's bred cows, replacement heifers, bulls, and last year's calves we're finishing. Come February, that number's going to jump by about 200 when calving starts. The number meant nothing to me. 500 cattle could be 5 or 5,000 for all I understood about managing them. And you've been doing this alone? With some hired help during calving season, she said. Silas used to bring in 2 or 3 ranch hands for February through April. Rest of the year it was just him and me. We managed. She paused, glancing at me sideways. But I'm not getting any younger, and this work doesn't get easier with age. You want to keep this operation running, you're going to need to pull your weight and then some. Back at the barn, she showed me how to check water tanks, breaking ice when necessary, making sure the heaters were working, how to inspect fence lines for damage, how to recognize signs of illness or injury in the herd. It was overwhelming, a fire hose of information I couldn't possibly remember, but Martha seemed unconcerned by my obvious inadequacy. Nobody learns this in a day, she said when I apologized for the 4th time for asking the same question. Silas didn't. I didn't. You won't either. Just pay attention, ask questions, and try not to make the same mistake twice. By 9 o'clock, I was exhausted in a way I'd never experienced. Street living was tiring, but it was a different kind. The constant vigilance, the interrupted sleep, the stress of survival. This was physical depletion, muscles I didn't know I had screaming in protest, hands raw despite gloves, and hunger that felt earned rather than desperate. Martha must have seen it in my face because she jerked her head toward the house. Go eat something. Rest if you need to. We'll go back out around 3 to do evening feed, and I'll show you how to check the bred heifers. They're the ones who'll start calving first. I made it to the kitchen and ate mechanically, eggs and toast and more coffee, standing at the counter because sitting down felt like admitting defeat. Through the window, I could see the ranch laid out in morning light, fields and fences, cattle grazing on hay we'd just spread, mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way that reminded me of Silas's face in that photograph. Built to endure, not to be easy. I thought about Seattle, about the soup kitchen line, and the tent under the overpass, and the constant calculation of where to sleep, what to eat, how to stay safe. That world felt like it belonged to someone else now, like a story I'd heard, rather than lived. Less than a week ago I'd had nothing. Now I had $3 million worth of something I didn't understand and couldn't manage, and was terrified of destroying. The phone Arthur had given me, a basic smartphone on the ranch's family plan, buzzed in my pocket. A text from him, coming by at 2 p.m. to go over paperwork. Hope the first morning went okay. I typed back with fingers that were still clumsy from cold. Still alive. Barely. His response came quickly. That's all Silas would expect, one day at a time. After eating, I went back to Silas's study, drawn by curiosity and the need to understand the man who'd left me all of this. The desk drawers I'd searched for keys revealed more upon closer inspection. Ledgers going back 30 years, meticulous records of cattle bought and sold, expenses and income tracked in Silas's careful handwriting. One leather journal was different from the account books. Personal, the pages filled with dated entries that weren't about the ranch at all. November 3rd, 2018, tried again to locate Caleb through the new investigator. Same results. The system is designed to protect kids, which I understand, but it's also keeping me from the grandson I could help. He turned 18 last year. I hope wherever he is, he's safe. I hope someone's looking out for him. February 12th, 2019. Bad winter. Lost 15 head in the blizzard despite moving them to shelter. Sometimes this work breaks you down. I think about quitting, selling everything, moving somewhere warm. But then I remember this place isn't just for me. It's for Caleb. Even if he never knows it existed, at least I'm building something that will outlast me. June 8th, 2020. Saw a kid in town today, maybe 19 or 20, asking for work. Something about him reminded me of Caleb. Dark hair, too thin, desperate eyes. I gave him a job mucking stalls for the summer. He didn't last 2 weeks. I think about Caleb out there somewhere, wonder if he's the type to stick with hard work, or if his mother's demons got passed down. I pray they didn't. The entries continued, a chronicle of hope and worry and relentless determination to keep building, keep trying, keep believing. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before Silas died. October 15th, 2024. Arthur says he has a lead on Caleb. I don't know if I'll live long enough to meet him, but at least I'll die knowing he'll be found. Everything is ready. The will, the papers, the ranch in good shape. I hope he forgives me for not finding him sooner. I hope he understands that I never stopped trying. I hope this place gives him what it gave me, purpose, belonging, a reason to get up in the morning even when everything hurts. I love you, grandson. I always have. I closed the journal carefully, vision blurring with tears I didn't bother to wipe away. This man, this grandfather I'd never met, had loved me with a persistence that spanned decades and survived bureaucratic walls and personal illness. He'd built an empire from 50 acres and 10 head of cattle, not for himself, but for a grandson he'd only held once as a baby. The weight of that gift was almost unbearable. How do you accept something that large without breaking under the responsibility? How do you honor a legacy when you have no idea what you're doing? Arthur arrived at 2 exactly, carrying a briefcase that looked like it cost more than most cars. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Silas had probably eaten 10,000 meals, and went through papers that reduced my life to signatures and initials. The property taxes are current through December, Arthur explained, showing me statements with numbers that made my head spin. You'll owe approximately $48,000 in April for the next tax year. The ranch account has sufficient funds to cover that, plus operating expenses through spring. After that, you'll need revenue from cattle sales to stay solvent. $48,000 in taxes for 1 year. The number was so large it lost meaning, becoming just another impossibility in a week full of them. What if I can't make it work? I asked, the fear I'd been avoiding finally spoken out loud. What if I try and I fail and I lose everything by next year? Arthur leaned back, considering me with that same patient kindness he'd shown in the diner a lifetime ago. Then you'll have tried, which is more than most people do with the opportunities they're given. But Caleb, he paused, choosing words carefully. Silas didn't leave you this ranch because he thought you'd automatically succeed. He left it because he believed you had the capacity to try. That's all any of us can do. Show up, do the work, learn from mistakes, and try again tomorrow. He pulled out one more document, this one smaller, an envelope with my name written in Silas's handwriting. He asked me to give you this after you'd seen the ranch, after you'd decided whether to stay or sell. I think now's the right time. My hands shook as I opened it, unfolding a single page covered in that now familiar, careful script. Caleb, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it long enough to meet you again. I'm sorry for that, sorrier than I can express. But I'm grateful Arthur found you, grateful you're holding this letter, grateful you got to see what I built for you. You don't owe me anything, not gratitude, not obligation, not even your presence on this land. If you choose to sell and take the money and build a different life, I'll understand. I just wanted you to have options, to have security, to never sleep cold or hungry again. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to learn this work and make this place your own, then I need you to know something. You belong here. Not because of blood or obligation, but because I built this ranch with you in mind. Every fence post I set, every calf I delivered, every hard winter I survived, it was all for you. This land is yours by right, by inheritance, by love that spanned 20 years of separation. Ranching is hard. Some days you'll want to quit. Some days you'll wonder what the hell you were thinking. But on the days when you see a calf take its first steps, when you watch a sunset paint the mountains gold, when you sit on the porch and feel the wind whisper through the pines, those days you'll understand. This isn't just land or cattle or money. It's home, it's belonging, it's proof that you were always wanted, always loved, always worth fighting for. Welcome home, grandson. I wish I could have said it in person. Love always, Silas. I set the letter down gently, like it might shatter. Outside, cattle were calling for their evening feed. Somewhere in the barn, Martha was probably getting equipment ready, waiting to see if I'd show up, or if the reality of this new life would send me running back to the familiar chaos of streets and survival. He really believed in me, I said quietly, more to myself than to Arthur. He didn't even know me, and he believed I could do this. He knew enough, Arthur said. He knew you survived foster care and the streets. He knew you were still standing after everything that tried to break you. That told him everything he needed to know about your character. I stood, folded the letter carefully, and put it in my pocket next to the workshop key. Through the window, I could see Martha emerging from the barn, checking her watch. Time for evening feed, time to do it all over again, and tomorrow, and the day after that. I'm staying, I told Arthur, and saying it out loud made it real in a way thinking it hadn't. I'm staying, and I'm going to learn this, and I'm probably going to screw up a lot, but I'm staying. Arthur smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile I'd seen from him. Then I'll file the estate papers to transfer everything into your name. You'll officially be Caleb Vance, owner of Whispering Pines Ranch. Congratulations. He left shortly after, and I went out to meet Martha for evening feed. She handed me gloves without comment, climbed into the truck, and waited for me to get in. As we drove toward the first pasture, the sun already starting its descent toward the mountains, she glanced at me sideways. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "Not going to bail after the first week when your body hurts and you realize how much you don't know?" "I'm really doing this," I said, surprised by how certain I sounded. "I'm going to need help, a lot of help, and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm not going anywhere." Martha nodded once, crisp and approving. "Good, because calving starts in 10 weeks, and you've got a hell of a lot to learn before then. Starting tomorrow, you're getting up at 4:30 instead of 5. We've got fence repairs to do before the ground freezes solid." I groaned, and she laughed, the first time I'd heard her do it. It was a good sound, warm and genuine, and it made the cold feel less hostile somehow. That night, exhausted beyond words, I fell asleep in Silas's bed, surrounded by his books and his pipe smell, and the quiet that used to terrify me, but was starting to feel like peace. Before I lost consciousness, I thought about the letter in my pocket, about words that had crossed death to reach me. "You belong here." Maybe I did. Maybe after 20 years of not belonging anywhere, I'd finally found the place that had been waiting for me all along. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to be worthy of the man who'd spent his last years making sure I'd have a home to come to. If you're still with me through this part of my story, thank you, because what comes next, the learning and the failing and the slow transformation from street kid to rancher, that's where the real work began. And it all started with a simple decision: to stay, to try. To believe that maybe Silas had been right about me all along. The weeks blurred into months, measured not by calendars, but by calluses forming on my hands and knowledge accumulating in layers. Martha was a relentless teacher, patient when I asked questions, but unforgiving when I made the same mistake twice. I learned to read cattle body language, to spot illness before it became crisis, to fix fence wire that snapped back and cut my cheek open. I learned that ranching wasn't romantic. It was cold mornings and shit-covered boots and decisions that sometimes meant an animal lived or died based on your competence. By mid-February, I could handle morning feed alone. Martha still supervised evening rounds, but she'd started trusting me with basic tasks that would have terrified me 3 months earlier. And then calving season arrived like a storm, sudden and all-consuming. The first calf came on a Tuesday night, temperature dropping below zero, wind howling through gaps in the barn walls. Martha got the call on the walkie-talkie from her cabin. A heifer in distress, first-time mother, labor not progressing. I met her at the barn, adrenaline overriding exhaustion, and found the heifer pacing, straining, bellowing with pain that made my chest ache. "Stage 2 labor for over an hour," Martha said, already pulling on shoulder-length gloves. "Calves stuck. We need to help, or we'll lose them both." She talked me through it, how to feel for the calf's position, how to attach chains to tiny hooves slick with amniotic fluid, how to pull with the cow's contractions, not against them. The heifer fought us, terrified and hurting, and I was terrified too, convinced I'd kill them both with my incompetence. "Pull!" Martha commanded, and I pulled, muscles screaming, chains cutting into my palms through gloves. Again, now. The calf came all at once, a rush of fluid and limbs, and this impossibly fragile creature sliding onto the straw. For one horrible moment, it didn't move, just lay there, stillborn, all my worst fears confirmed. Then Martha grabbed a handful of straw and rubbed the calf's nose, rough and vigorous, and suddenly it gasped, coughed, shook its head, and took a shuddering breath that was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. "There you go," Martha said quietly, satisfaction in her voice. "Welcome to the world, little one." The heifer, exhausted, turned to sniff her baby, started licking, that ancient instinct overriding pain and fear. Within 20 minutes, the calf was trying to stand on legs that didn't quite work yet, falling and trying again with determination I recognized from somewhere deep. "You did good," Martha told me, wiping blood and birth fluids from her arms. "First pull is always the hardest. But you didn't panic, didn't freeze. Silas would have been proud." I looked at the calf, wobbly but alive, already nursing from its mother, and something in my chest cracked open. This was why Silas had built this place, not for money or legacy in the abstract sense, but for this, the hard, necessary work of bringing life into the world and protecting it once it arrived. Calving season lasted 8 weeks. I delivered 17 more calves, lost 2 despite everything we tried, and learned that grief was part of the job. You mourned what you couldn't save, and then got up the next morning because there were others depending on you. It was the hardest work I'd ever done, and the most meaningful. Spring came slowly to Montana, snow melting in patches to reveal grass that had been waiting underneath. With calving finished and the herd healthy, Martha insisted I start going into town, meeting the community that Silas had been part of for decades. The first time I walked into the feed store, conversation stopped. I felt every eye assess me. The stranger, the outsider, the kid who'd inherited what others had spent lifetimes building. But then an older man at the counter stuck out his hand. "You're Silas's grandson," he said. "Not a question. I'm Tom Brennan. Ran the ranch next to your grandfather for 30 years. Sorry for your loss. He was a good man." Others followed, introducing themselves, sharing stories about Silas that made him real in ways photographs couldn't. How he'd helped neighbors during the bad winter of 2013, sharing hay when their own ran out. How he'd mentored young ranchers, teaching them the same lessons Martha was teaching me. How he'd talked about me year after year, never giving up hope that someday I'd be found. "He showed me your baby picture once," a woman named Claire said, owner of the local diner. "Said you had his mother's eyes. He believed you'd come home someday, even when the rest of us thought he was chasing ghosts." Their acceptance wasn't automatic. I had to prove myself. Had to show I wasn't just some city kid playing rancher with inherited money. But slowly, through shared work and showing up and making mistakes they'd all made themselves, I became part of something larger than myself. Part of a community that valued competence and perseverance more than pedigree. By summer, neighboring ranchers called when they needed extra hands. I joined the volunteer fire department, learned to fight grass fires that could destroy everything in hours. I went to the local bar on Friday nights, played pool badly, listened to stories that taught me more about ranching than any manual could. 1 year after arriving at Whispering Pines, I stood in the same spot where Martha had first shown me the ranch, watching cattle graze on grass that had come back lush after spring rains. The herd was healthy, the fences repaired, the books balanced with enough profit to hire seasonal help for next calving season. Martha joined me, moving slower these days, her retirement approaching. "You've come a long way," she said. "From that scared kid who didn't know the front end of a cow from the back. I'm still scared half the time," I admitted, "still making mistakes." "That never stops," she said, "but you show up anyway. That's what matters. That's what Silas saw in you before you even knew it was there." I thought about the letters in the workshop, the timeline tracking 14 years of searching, the grandfather who'd built a home for a grandson he'd only held once. I thought about the night I'd almost walked away, almost gone back to Seattle, and the familiar chaos of surviving rather than living. "I want to start something," I said. "A program maybe for kids aging out of foster care. Give them jobs here, teach them ranching, show them there's something beyond streets and shelters. What Silas gave me, I want to pass that forward." Martha was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "He'd like that. Building something that outlasts you, that helps people the way he wanted to help you, that's legacy." The program started small, 1 kid the first summer, 2 the next, teaching them what Martha had taught me. That competence comes from repetition, that failure is part of learning, that sometimes the family you build is stronger than the one you're born into. Some stayed, some left, but all of them left different than they arrived, changed by work that demanded their best and land that held them without judgment. 3 years after that first morning feeding cattle in the dark, I opened the workshop chest with the combination Silas had left. Inside were more letters, more photographs, and a small wooden box containing his father's pocket watch, a note attached, for Caleb, when he's ready to carry forward what came before. I wound the watch, felt its steady tick against my palm, and thought about time, how it had been stolen from Silas and me, 14 years we'd never get back. But also how time had given me this, 3,000 acres of belonging, a herd I knew individually, neighbors who'd become family, and work that made me fall into bed exhausted every night, knowing I'd done something that mattered. Sometimes I still wake at dawn and forget where I am. For just a moment I'm back under the I-5 overpass, calculating the safest route to the soup kitchen, preparing for another day of survival. Then I hear cattle calling for their morning feed, smell pine and hay and coffee brewing in the kitchen, and remember, I'm home. Not the temporary, conditional spaces of my childhood, but home in the truest sense, a place that was built for me, waited for me, held me when I finally arrived. A place where I belong not because someone decided I was worth keeping, but because my grandfather spent his last years making absolutely certain I'd have somewhere to return to. The ranch runs itself now, mostly. I've learned enough to make decisions without Martha, though I still call her when something's beyond my knowledge. We've expanded the herd, improved the genetics, built a reputation for quality cattle that sell well at auction. The foster care program brings in 6 kids every summer, teaching them that their past doesn't define their future. On quiet evenings, I sit on the porch where Silas must have sat thousands of times, watching the light change on distant mountains, listening to wind whisper through the pines. I think about the letters he wrote that I never received, the years he searched for a grandson he'd only met once, the stubborn love that refused to quit even when every rational person told him to move on. And I understand now what he was building. Not just a ranch or a legacy or even a home, but proof. Proof that love doesn't require proximity. Proof that family is more than biology. Proof that somewhere in this world, even when you don't know it, someone might be fighting for you, building something for you, believing in you with a faith that spans years and miles and bureaucratic walls designed to keep you apart. I never got to thank him, never got to sit across a table and say the words that matter. I found your letters. I read your journals. I know you tried. I know I was loved. But every morning when I feed the cattle, every calf I deliver, every kid from foster care who learns that they're capable of more than survival, that's my thank you. That's how I honor the grandfather who spent 14 years searching, and his last year ensuring I'd have something to come home to. If you've stayed with me through this whole story, if you've read about a street kid becoming a rancher and a grandfather's love reaching across death itself, I hope it reminded you of something important. You never know who's out there fighting for you. You never know what's being built in the background of your life by people who believe you're worth the effort. And you never know when walking through a door you're terrified to open might lead you home. $3 million in property, 500 head of cattle, 3,000 acres of Montana grassland. But what Silas really left me was simpler than that. A place to belong, a reason to get up at 4:30 every morning, proof that I was always wanted, always loved, always worth searching for. Welcome home, he wrote. And finally, after 20 years of wandering, I was.